Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name's Christopher Hamer and today we're going to be taking a look at another Nikon classic, this time the Nikon F5. Nikon F5 was released in 1996 and was only replaced in 2004 by the F6, though in many respects this was the last true professional Nikon F body before the digital era, although perhaps it did face a little bit of competition from itself. The F5 had all the bells and whistles you could want. 8 frames per second, extremely high shutter speeds of 1/8000 a second, great high-speed shutter sync for flash photography, a removable and replaceable prism. You had fast rewind, you had a balancing mirror to allow you to get better photographs at lower shutter speeds. You had a lot of features in this camera that you just never had before. You had a built-in you could get the MF28 multifunction back on here as well, allowing you to add things like long exposure and so on. This camera had it all. In many ways, the Nikon F5 really is, even today, very recognizable as one of Nikon's pro cameras. You can definitely see a lot of the Nikon D1 in it, for instance. So if you were to buy one today, what would it be like? Well, for one, you're going to feel quite at home if you've used any of Nikon's D series cameras. It is basically the only F camera that followed the design language of the D series. And by that I mean this DX models, so i.e. a D with one number behind it, D1, D2, D3, D4, D5, and now indeed D6, all have the vertical grip built in, non-removable as part of the body. And they all have this sort of slightly larger format. And essentially, this is the only F camera that ever really followed that. The F6 that came after it, which I've also made a video about, apologies, I don't appear to be able to talk today, actually had a removable grip. So this is the only one that had it fully integrated and you had no choice in the matter. Powering this camera, we have 8 AA batteries, which is quite something really. You're going to get a good amount of film through this camera before you run out. And in many ways, this camera is still very similar to the D series cameras of today. You have your mode switch at the top, allowing you to switch between program, aperture priority, shutter priority, and indeed manual modes. You have your exposure compensation button. You have the ability to light up the LCDs, of which there are 3 if you have the MF28 fitted. You have the ability to choose focus points, though you only have 5 of them, which is the same as the D1. The autofocus system in this camera is very good, though it's still a fair bit away from even the F6 and certainly far away from the modern day D series and indeed Z series cameras, which are incomparable to something like this. Having something like fast auto rewind built in is pretty great. I mean, that's going to give you the ability to change film faster than someone that didn't have that built in. For professionals, obviously, that's something that's really important. Though you definitely notice that Nikon learned a lot along the way as well. So I have that video on the F6 and I found that you already had a lot of things there which you're perhaps more used to on the more modern cameras, whereas this definitely still feels a little bit more old school. It did have the ability to pick up automatically what the ISO of the film was, based on the, well, it's called DX back then, wasn't it, that told the camera. And you had the custom setting menu, which is bringing back so many memories, controlled by 5 small buttons here at the bottom. You were able to create custom setting menus. It's the same system as the D1 used, and it's probably as horrendous, but at the time, I'm sure it was pretty fantastic. Adding that MF28 definitely gave this camera a lot of extra capabilities if you were a bit more creative. So those sort of time-lapse photography, you had the option to do long exposures that are a bit more managed. You basically had a lot more powerful, you had the date back obviously as well. It was a very powerful thing to have, which obviously a lot of people did make the decision to upgrade to if they were doing that kind of photography. At the time when this was released, it wasn't without controversy because of how heavy it is. It weighs 1.2 kilograms. Now, obviously it has the features to match, but that is heavy. Add a lens onto it and you're starting to get, you know, close and over that 2 kilo mark, which does make the camera a little bit more difficult to hold for a long time. Obviously, if you're adding some of those super telephotos at the time on, you certainly were in for a sort of heavy day of weightlifting. On this camera at the moment, I have a bit of a classic, the 85mm 1.4 AFD. I think that that's one of those lenses you would have seen a lot on this camera for portraiture, and I think even today it's a wonderful lens, and the autofocus is so incredibly fast when you pair it with something like the F5. Instantaneous, locks on, rips through the focus range. I mean, it's actually quite impressive how fast this is. I mean, we can go from you know, minimum focus distance of about 85 centimeters straight to in focus in a fraction of a second, which was pretty amazing at the time. There's not a huge amount more I want to say about the F5. I think it's really fun. It's ergonomically comfortable if you have large hands. You're going to struggle if you have small hands. It's noticeably heavy. I'll just touch on one last thing, which is this is actually the camera that Kodak initially used to create some of its film cameras. So you could actually get an F5 that had been upgraded to digital, which is super cool. I like the fact that that's a bit of a sort of historical reference, some of the interesting things that happened to these cameras at the time. There's obviously the F90 that they did that with as well, but this was more of a pro camera. Obviously, that really doesn't compare to the modern digital cameras, and I'm not even going to try and get one of those to review, because I know it's a nightmare in terms of the media they used, etc. So we're not even going to go there. But yeah, this is just a quick look at the F5 in 2021. It's a really cool camera. I think if you want to shoot film today, it's still a fun camera to pick up. Personally, I'd lean towards the F6 as it works more like a modern digital camera. So for me, it feels more at home. But you're going to get great photos with this camera, the F6, or even the F4. The self sort of correcting shutter, which makes sure that has, you know, shutter life of 150,000 frames. That's a lot back in the film days. You can get through that in digital, but in film, that is a lot of film you've processed. This is a really fascinating camera to have, and to be frank, you can pick them up for not outrageous prices on eBay, depending on your country, etc. So it's a fun camera to have. It's a true professional workhorse that you can pick up and be creative with. I think that you have to really be into film to pick one of these up, but if you are and you want to have a go with it, you know, it's absolutely great. Interestingly, this camera is a fairly early one, picked up in the 90s. It is still in very good condition. It hasn't had a huge amount of film put through it, and the rubber is still in good condition too. So I think that does actually mean that if you pick one up that wasn't heavily used, you're actually still going to get a lot of life out of it without it being uncomfortable use because of the rubber going funny or sticky. So yeah, really, really cool. I hope you enjoyed this quick look at the Nikon F5. I'm sure there are many of you that know a lot more about this than me because you used one, but for those of you that haven't seen one before or looked at one in detail, just thought it'd be a bit fun to have a look at. I know there's many more specs that I could have gone through, but to be honest with you, as I don't think that this is really a buyer's guide, as some of my videos are, hopefully this is still of interest. So thank you very much for watching. This was the quick look at the Nikon F5. If you have any questions about it, pop them in the comment section. I can try and answer them, and if not, I can absolutely ask the person that owns them, a family member of mine. More than happy to answer any of those. Equally, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comment section if you want to hear more, see more similar videos. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, as it really does help. Thank you very much for watching, and I do hope I see you again next time. Goodbye.